So, welcome everybody to this second webinar we host this year. I hope you can all hear me well. If you cannot hear me, please raise your hands or send me a little chat message, but I presume you can hear me well. So welcome everybody on this webinar where we will try and give you some hands-on tools and accelerators to improve your vendor and contract management. And of course, we all know that tools are quite important these days. And when we look into critical success factors of implementing contract and vendor management processes, we have seen that based on a study that was executed, I think end of 2018, beginning of 2019 by E&Y, we have seen that these are the typical critical success factors of implementing contract and vendor management. And the study has proven that indeed, well, quite important are the benefits you need to make sure your contract and vendor management is measuring. Quite important that you have indeed your coherence internally and with the supplier, so you have to be on one line, so it enrolls in responsibility speaking. You have to have top management support for sure. Without any top management support, you cannot implement any process. And of course, you need to have your governance structure and relationship in place. And so it continues. But what we see here at the bottom is that enabling technologies are quite far down the road as a critical success factor. And that explains a lot, because what we often see is that a fool with a tool is still a fool. And I'm not underestimating the importance of tools, and I'm not underestimating the importance of technology, but I do see the importance of having the right people supporting it in terms of top management, having the right governance in place, and having the right controls in place to execute and implement your contract and vendor management. So without this being said, and we have already done a couple of sessions on those processes, we will not elaborate on the processes today. We will merely focus on the tools, and we hope that indeed when you start implementing a couple of the tools that are available on our website, and you can find it in the tools section on our website, where we have a couple of tools that we will showcase you today available to you. So when we explain the tools that you indeed think about, well, I need to have some sort of a process in support of my tool. And we will repeat that during the session a couple of times today, but I'd like to stress it, and a couple of studies that have been executed by renowned companies like E&Y have also proven this exact same point here. Now, when we talk about tools and accelerators, I do believe that there are different types of tools. On the one hand, you have your strategic tools and accelerators, that make you think about the setup of things, how to do things. Secondly, there's your tactical tools and accelerators in terms of helping you to execute things. And then thirdly, there's the operational tools and accelerators that helps you to really monitor, manage your process execution. And when we talk about strategic tools, we will further elaborate today on two important points to start with. First of all, your contract and your vendor classification elements. Secondly, your data tooling and quality assessment, because where your data resides is also quite important in leveraging the most value out of your tool, which will then indeed be translated in how you implement your contract and vendor management through a roadmap. And we have that available as well as a tool because it's a project execution, which is quite important to follow. And then last but not least, of course, there's the whole element of executing your contract and vendor management process through contract lifecycle management, through third-party risk management, and through supplier relationship management. And that will be further explained indeed how we have tackled that with indeed the functionalities we offer in a software called Sourcing Cockpit, and which will be explained with our partner we have on board here today, which is Tony, which will further elaborate on this, and the tactical tool will be further elaborated. My colleague who is next to me here in the office, Koen Verkouteren, who will tackle that tactical part of the tool. And I will focus on the strategic elements of the tooling and will further guide you with explaining how we have translated that into some useful tools you can again download from our website, and that will be shown at the end of the webinar session. So without further ado, let's dive into the strategic tools and accelerators. Yeah. First of all, and that explains again here the part we focus on, well, we see that not every vendor is a partner. And you for sure know that. I do believe that quite a bit of vendors want to be a partner, but they are not necessarily a partner into your organization. Secondly, not every contract is critical. And I do believe that quite too many people have the feeling that their contract is critical. And not only the internal people, but also the vendors have the feeling their contract is critical without having the right criteria and approach to classify both. Yeah. And I do mean you need both. You need to have a vendor classification methodology and you need to have a contract classification methodology to not only manage and your mutual expectation on the collaboration, but also, very importantly, to spend your effort wisely. And again, that needs to be translated in your operational tools for sure. And your operational tools should allow you to classify your partners in maybe a category management approach, but should also allow you to classify your contracts into their criticality, non-critical, or low spend, high spend type of elements. And these are the things you need to tackle first in your strategy before you implement any tool. So if you just start blindly with implementing a tool without having a good vendor classification approach and criteria, and without having a good contract classification approach and criteria, you might end up with spending your effort in a place that you don't want to spend your effort in. And that's where we come in with our tools. So we have, first of all, again, you can download it from our website. We have built a vendor classification tool as a strategic enabler, yeah, where you can, with your sticky notes, with post-it notes, use this as a, and I know it's quite difficult if you have obey us type of rooms where you would be doing that in person. Well, now you can do it digitally, where we provide you with a vendor classification matrix that is on the one side based on the dependency you have on your vendor, and on the other side based on the relationship type you have with your vendor. And the dependency can be low on a certain vendor, but your relationship could be quite relational. So that means when the dependency is low and your relationship is relational, that you will very probably end up with a critical relationship with that partner. And that might lead into specific elements in your process that you will execute on the operational side. Quite important. Again, here, you will not spend the same amount of time on a transactional vendor as opposed to a partnership relationship. Question is, do you have the right criteria to classify your vendors and elements? We offer you a tool that would help you enable to do that vendor classification. A very important starting point. As I said, not every vendor is a partner. Manage also their expectations by communicating in what area they reside, and then you can have your relationship management executed according to the classification you have put them in. Quite important. Our software, Sourcing Cockpit, also supports this operational vendor classification. Second, your contract classification. Also here, not every contract is critical. Not every contract you need to do a monthly review. Not every contract you want to do every month a governance session with your on that specific contract. Also here we offer a tool that you can use with sticky notes to classify your contracts into, on the one side, a monetary value. Is that a large spend versus a lower spend? And then also secondly, versus the business criticality of the contract. And that might be indeed, again, a high spend, but a low business criticality. So ending up in what we call a tactical contract. And then you have your strategic contracts, which are, of course, in high spend and are enabling to the business criticality, meaning that they would be having a lot more interactions on the contract level. And this double view is quite important to know with a vendor, which might be classified, for instance, in a legacy or in a transitional category as a vendor, that you might have multiple contracts which would be split on the one side on business critical contract, but even non-business critical contracts with the low value that could reside even with a partnership relationship. And that double view is quite important to start with from a strategic point of view, to translate it again into your software, because as I said, a fool with a tool is still a fool. If you cannot classify your vendors and you cannot classify your contracts, you might spend your time in a place where you don't want to spend it, or maybe overspend it in governance and overspend it in risk assessments and the like. That's quite an important strategic starting point to begin with. Yeah. As I said, a fool with a tool is still a fool. You can give a hammer to somebody, and there's a great expression in English that says, if you give somebody a hammer, everything will look like a nail. But if you use the hammer differently, well, that is not where you want to use the hammer for. Secondly, data is the new gold, and those two go hand in hand. On the one side, you have your technology tooling, which holds a lot of data. On the other side, you need to know what to do with your tooling and your data. And what we have developed for that is also a tooling and data quality assessment, where indeed during the different phases of your contract life cycle, so in the master data of your contract, the specific contract elements like your contract awarding procedures and the like, your service data when it comes to unit prices, when it comes to KPIs and SLAs, your financial data when it comes to indeed the contract value, the performance data, so the adherence of the governance and the KPIs, and then of course the compliance data that is to do with your audit trail and your regulatory compliance needs. All these elements in your contract lifecycle have data, and they have data where there's a certain source where the data resides, how you collect the data, what the quality of the data is, how complete your data is, what your satisfaction with your tooling is, and what the annual spend is on that tool. And this picture will give you a strategic view in where the gaps are into your tooling and data landscape. And as I said, a fool with a tool is still a fool, but if you do not know where your data is, what quality your data is residing, and how much money it costs to manage and maintain that data, well, that will make you running blind quite significantly into the execution of your contract management. And when we zoom in into one of these areas, you can clearly see that indeed your data source can be internal, but it can also be external. Not all your data resides with you. It could well be that part of the data, for instance, your performance management core data, might be externally managed, so might be external on the provider side. That is not necessarily bad, but you have to at least know where the data source is. Secondly, how do you collect the data? Is that predominantly a manual process, or is that an automated process? Also here, it is quite important into your different data sources. So for the contract data, for your performance data, for your compliance data, how do I collect my data in a certain tool? Thirdly, what is my data quality? I can have a lot of automation in my data collection, but with a very poor quality. That leaves me with quite a bit of a gap in the efficiency on the implementation of any tool you might have in your lifecycle management. And then, of course, the completeness of my data. I might collect it quite automatically with a medium quality, but it is not complete. So I miss a lot of data. I miss out of the 20 or 30 providers I have, I only have it for 2 or 3, and I miss 18 out of the 20 providers I have in my data completeness. And then, of course, my tooling satisfaction. That goes from low to medium high. I can have a good automation with a high quality, but I'm so unsatisfied for any good reason. It might be too expensive. It might be a very bad interface. It might be very poor APIs that you have onto that tool specifically. And that image, we have available as a tool to help you strategically think, on the one side, how do I classify my vendors? Secondly, how do I classify my contracts on those vendors? And then thirdly, how do I all put it together into my current tooling landscape? And that will give you a first strategic view on where you want to go, into implementing a tool that helps you indeed during your life cycle manage and monitor your different data sources and your different processes. Yeah, and for that to be working well, right, from a strategic to an operational implementation, of course, you need to have your tactical tool in between. And your tactical tool very typically is your roadmap, is a journey. And we have designed, before we go into the operational side of the implementation of the tooling, Sourcing Cockpit, which helps you indeed by implementing that life cycle, the risk management and the relationship management. Yet we have also developed for our clients a contract and vendor management roadmap and journey. And this will now be explained by my colleague Koen, which is an expert in this domain, and he will explain you how that journey typically runs from the idea all the way up to the implementation.